in that time, I saw very closely how media and politics is really interconnected. And at that time, I mean, we all know, like being student of international relations, we know how traditional diplomacy works, right? And I'm sure you are familiar with like the track one diplomacy and track two diplomacy, those kind of things. So uh, during my like work at the embassy, I saw that it's becoming more and more important to not just talk to the government, not just talk to the interest group or different stakeholders, but also directly talk to the people of a country. So that's the part of like diplomacy that's called like the or considered as like public diplomacy. So when a government of a country is directly talking to citizen of another country, it can be in group or it can be in individual, regardless. It's the government to individual connection that defines like public diplomacy. So I was like really interested in that, and then I wanted to look at graduate school. I had like different choices that I wanted to go for, but like when I applied and other stuffs, what I saw in terms of like the scholarship options, I had the best scholarship offer from here. So, I mean, I took the decision to come here instead of going to England, which was my original plan that I'll go and study in England. But I mean, brought me here. And I started mainly studying, like I started with this idea. What I wanted to learn is the how media impact politics in general, especially international politics. That was my goal. And then I got interested in how media particularly interacts with diplomacy. And then later on focused on particularly primary public diplomacy and media, because that's where like most of, I would say the media component comes in. So talking about like public diplomacy, I need to clarify some things before I do that. So as a scholar, I think myself like I feel I belong to the post-positivist school of thought. So if you have, I'm sure you're familiar with this different school. The reason is that, I mean, I do believe in the positivist school, but the thing is, I think the social science that we study, we cannot like be in like fully take the positivist method and use that to answer all the questions that comes to us, or even attempt to answer those questions. So you need a combinations of like positivism and some modern post-positivist theory. So I think that's where I kind of position myself. I also kind of see myself as a multidisciplinary and mixed method researcher. So, I mean, I was a student, I still am, and I wanted to look it from the media perspective. That's why I transferred to a media school, because I thought I knew IR enough. Definitely, there's never enough, but I think I knew IR better than I understand the media portion. And the puzzle that I was to has two components, right? I need to understand how media works. I need to understand how international relations work. So I had some knowledge having a bachelor and master's from JU. I had my foundations in international relations. So I wanted to go to a media school so that I understand how media portion works, so that I can combine these two, bring these two disciplines together. So that's how, I mean, I got to the point where I am. Initially, I started my research with place branding and nation branding. So for my, when I did my master's thesis here, What I was looking at, I'm sure you will be familiar with this, the Beautiful Bangladesh campaign. So I used that in an experiment that was, I used some clips from that Beautiful Bangladesh campaign commercial. Uh, those commercials that was broadcast in televisions and other platforms. And I had people from about 40 different countries covering all the continents in the world. And I basically wanted to see, is tourism advertising, can you use tourism advertising or some sort of like positive stimuli to change a perception of people about a country? So, I mean, normally when we think about like Bangladesh, think about like foreigners' perspective. How do you think? I mean, and this is my question to you. How do you think most of the people from any other countries think of Bangladesh? Like, what's our trademark? Ready-made garments, lot of natural disaster, some political instability, mostly negative stuff, right? I mean, that's what get in the media. There are definitely a lot of positive things happening, but media being media always tend to focus on negative things more than positive things. And that has always been a struggle that I live with, but that's how media works. And we'll have to deal with that in a way. So that like brings me to the point that how you can like use this kind of tools that already exist, this kind of campaigns, to kind of improve the country image for any given country, especially for third world countries or developing countries like Bangladesh, mainly because we do not have a lot of resource to spend for diplomacy effort, right? So think about UK or USA or France. They have those cultural centers. I mean, we have all three in Bangladesh. There's the British Council, there's the Alias Process, there's the American Center. What are they basically doing? They are exporting their culture. They are branding themselves, right? And then there are many other soft powers too. But countries like Bangladesh, we do not have enough resource to open a Bangladesh. We have only enough resource to open embassies, but not like cultural centers that we can teach other country about ourselves and show them who we truly are. So that led me to these questions. Can we use something that we already have and use that to improve like our country image? So I did an experiment with that, and the result was yes. I am summarizing, I'm not going into the details, but I had a very large sample of about 700 people from different country across all over the world. And most of the people, I mean, their attitude improved after to trust foreign government as well. But on the other scale, it was like really working. So that's what kind of got me started into like understanding like the public diplomacy, how we can use these kind of different tools, especially media tools, to encourage people from many different countries, not encourage, basically improve their attitude towards Bangladesh or their knowledge about the country or any other given country in that result, right? So let's talk more about like public diplomacy in general. Right? So in public diplomacy, there's, as I was saying, that public diplomacy is the aspect of diplomacy. It's a part of the track to diplomacy in a way that where a government directly communicates with citizen of other country, right? So there are many literature that suggest how public diplomacy can be done and how it is done. One of the most like prominent researcher and scholar in this field is Nicholas Cull. I will send you some material link on the chat when I'm done with that. So Cull in 2009 proposed a taxonomy of public diplomacy. Are any of you familiar with Nicholas Cull's work or his work in public diplomacy? Okay. So in that, he basically distinguished that how you can do, there are 5 ways that you can do public diplomacy. So the first one he said is the most common is the advocacy. So what happens basically in advocacy is that a government talks to other countries, people, and try to persuade them or yeah, in a way pursue them or get their favor in terms of their policy. So let's say, for example, what is a recent example? If we think about Bangladesh, I'm sure you are all, you all know about this, that recently Bangladesh has changed its policy towards the towards Israel a little bit, right? That now Bangladeshi passport, like new or Bangladeshi passport holder can travel to Israel, whereas previously that was banned, that you could not travel to Israel. And that, I'm sure as a student of international relations, you understand that did not happen in a single day. It was a huge effort from the Israel side, not just towards Bangladesh, many other countries, many other mainly Muslim countries, to advocate on their behalf to change their policy, right? So that's like one of the component, like the advocacy component of public diplomacy. And you can use that to directly talk to people, talk to like different stakeholders like business owners and others, people who might actually benefit from this, or someone like tourists who actually want to or any other country, be it in favor of or opposing, it's going to have an effect on people. So there's this international broadcasting aspect there, right? And the fifth one that I forgot initially, this is, according to Nicholas Gull, is one of the most important part of public diplomacy, and it's called listening. So why is listening important? Is that the way Carl defines listening is that you will have to understand, or you will have to listen to other countries and other countries' people's opinion and find out what is their perception about you, about your country, right? And then, only then, you can start working to change it. If you don't listen what other countries are thinking about you or saying about you, you are not able to take an appropriate action. You might think this is what I want to sell, the brand, but your brand might, people might perceive you as a like a totally different uh, mm, yeah, have a totally different perception of you than what you have. So listening comes like very important. Now let me get to uh, the how does that fit in into the digital aspect, like where does the digital like portion fit in. So if we think about digital diplomacy, when we talk about the term digital diplomacy, it's basically just a fancy term for like kind of like what we are doing now, conducting diplomacy over, we are not conducting diplomacy, but communication over online media or new, the ICT use of, so use of information and communication technology in diplomacy, right? So that's one of the common factor. And you will see that, and I want to see a raise of hand if possible. How many of you follow at least one or two, or at least one embassies on Facebook or on any social media? Can I get like some sort of response? Like most people, most IS student, I mean, I think you at least follow a couple of embassies from different countries that are in Bangladesh working, right? And if you look at their feed, what are they doing? They are disseminating information about their country and about their activities and other stuff, right? And they are not necessarily, and definitely, they are not talking to the politicians directly. For that, they have meetings. They do that behind the scene, right? But the things that they are doing on social media, who are these for? These are for directly for public to see, right? So they are using these platforms. Just one example, there are many other ways to do this. To do all of this almost. So listening, you can do that via social media. You can, I'm sure if you follow the embassies regularly, USA, Twitter is still more popular than Facebook, and especially for like official use, Twitter is still uh, more most commonly used. And for my this study that I was talking about, I looked at 27 embassies from all over the country. And I selected these 27 embassies based on the soft power ranking. So I'm sure you're familiar with the soft power ranking. So there's this Center for Public Diplomacy. I think they are not, I think, I know they are based in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So they do this research with the cooperation of University of either Edinburgh. Yeah, I think it's University of Edinburgh that they do this ranking of soft powers in the world, and they have a detailed methodology. Just to look up soft power index. Just if you just Google it, you will find it, and it's from CPT, and they rank the top 30 countries in terms of soft power. So my rationale for going for that 30 countries was that those are the countries that have the most resource in a way to spend in terms of soft power, because they are ranking high. So they're definitely doing well. So if I want to look at what are the trends, it would be best to look at who are actually doing it most actively and more proactively. Yeah, doing it better in a way. So I took that list of 30 countries, and I had to get rid of three because of different issues. For example, USA was one of them, and USA does not have an embassy in the USA. So that was obviously had to be gone. And then there were two embassies that did not meet my minimum criteria of how many tweets I wanted from each embassy, because I cannot, if I take 5 tweets from one country and 500 from another, that does not work. You need a balance. Yes, it does not have to be the exact same number, but when you're working with your methodology, it needs to be consistent, right? You need to find a range, you need to define it. In
সকলকে ধন্যবাদ। হাসানাত ভাই, আপনাকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ এত সুন্দর করে বিষয়টাকে উপস্থাপন করার জন্য। তো এখন আমাদের প্রশ্ন উত্তর পর্ব শুরু হবে। তো এখানে যারা উপস্থিত আছেন, প্রথমেই বলেছিলাম আপনাদের যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে আপনারা কাগজে টুকে দিতে পারেন, আর হ্যান্ড রাইজ করে আপনাদের প্রশ্নটা ইলাবোরেটলি ভাইকে জিজ্ঞেস করতে পারেন। তো আমার মনে হয় স্যার প্রশ্ন করবেন। স্যার, আপনি করতে পারেন।
No, তোমরা প্রশ্ন করো, আমি করবো, but I think the students should come first.
তো প্রথমে যদি কারো কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে করতে পারেন।
Acha, to break the silence, I think I can ask a question, okay? So, thank you so much, Imran Hasnat. That was so fascinating, I would say. Amazing, to know your research experience and the output of your research. That was very enriching for me, especially, and I believe for all of us. Okay. So my question is actually pretty basic. I mean, I don't know whether I missed that part of your lecture. Maybe you have already spoken about that. Just to make sure that I didn't miss, I'd like to ask you, while doing your research on, and collect that data from 27 embassies,
Mhm.
um, did you really categorize the states in terms of political and military power, economic capacity, and social cultural norms,
Mhm.
that really matters in international relations,
Yeah.
and their foreign policy issues, foreign policy making, and their international behavior. So, to what extent it mattered to you, and as you have already said that you are kind of a post-positivist, pro-post-positivist guy, a researcher. So I'm also, I have some sort of inclination towards post-positivism. So you have collected data from 27 embassies and you analyzed that. That's sort of quantitative to a certain extent, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so and you had to, I think you had to use some sort of qualitative understanding too. Okay,
Mhm.
so how did you actually reconcile between your liking for post-positivism and your actual research, which was basically methodologically kind of positivist? So I think there are two questions I've already asked. Okay,
Yeah,
so that's why
and
I think.
that's really
Okay, yeah.
good.
So go ahead.
Okay. So to answer your first question, like what factors did I take into account, like when selecting the countries and other stuff? So they are the list of the 30 countries that I chose the 27 from is basically from the soft power index. And the reason I took that is they have one of the most, I'd say, comprehensive ranking system when they rank countries in terms of soft power. So they have 6 sources of so they have 2 categories of data, some subjective data, some objective data, because when it comes to country perception, there's some objectivity, of course, and some subjectivity there is. So in their objective data category, they have things like culture, digital, education, engagement, their enterprise, which is their business sector and other stuff, and then also government. So what is the type of government and the government structure in general. But also there are the several subjective data. So it's a combination of taking some element from the what should I call it, like the how each countries are doing from like the UN database, and also uh, collecting some subjective data by doing a survey. And I think the survey has 7 sub indices, and those are, I believe, about the cuisine, about tech products, about friendliness of the people and the country in general, their culture, their like export goods, especially luxury goods, like if something comes from there, their foreign policy. So how is their foreign policy? And especially read their methodology, I saw that the questions they ask people to rate these countries on are based on how this like how good this a country's public oh, it's not sorry foreign policy is for the like the global good and not just for selfish reasons. So they want to see a country's overall contribution to the world in general. And also they rank them on like the livability in the in the country, so how stable the country is and how's the like kind of lifestyle there. So I think that brought in to some extent the uh, quantitative and also qualitative component from like people's opinion in one way to in selection of the country. But also in my research, so it was a 3-tier research. The first 2 tier was very purely quantitative, I would say, because this was basically counting the frequencies, putting them in different categories, basically a quantitative content analysis in a way. However, the comments and the replies that I collected from those posts that are from the people, those I analyzed qualitatively. So when I say qualitatively is that I did not take any theory to start with, but more took a grounding, the grounded theory approach. So where you really don't have a theory, but you start reading plain text and you start seeing different And again, it's since it's not based on a theory, it's purely like a qualitative analysis based on my reading of the text. And I definitely wrote like my rationale why this is this one. But I mean, what I found is that again, and it goes kind of with the sentiment, the emotion and sentiment. There's a very thin line, but I also saw that there was a lot of resentment in terms of emotion. There was a lot of disbelief, and a lot of people, I mean, it's social media, so there were a lot of trolling, so there were a lot of sarcasm too. So this, I think, gave a additional strength to my study and kind of like separated it from just purely a positive study where I'm just counting how it is, but this explained like kind of the why aspect of this and to inform that in a way.
Thank you, Imran. Basically, we all understand that there is nothing like absolutely or exclusively positivist or post-positivist. There must be some sort of basing, and I think we had to do that. And I understand, and it's a long, arduous process you had to go through. But we all like spoon feeding, So, so that's why we're asking questions like this to get to the result in a direct fashion. So yeah, so thank you so much for your answer. Now I think there are some other questions.
There's Tariqud asked on the chat, is public diplomacy a theory? Tariqud, so public diplomacy is not a theory itself. There are theories that talks about public diplomacy. So what public diplomacy is, it's basically a sub-discipline of international relations, or to be more exact, a subsection of diplomacy in general. But there are many theories about public diplomacy. So for example, if you think of IR, right? IR is not a theory. IR is a field, but we have theories like liberalism, realism, constructivism, all those different school of thought or areas that brings in different theoretical component to this. So public diplomacy is to some extent like that. It's not a theory by itself. There are other theories that deals with public diplomacy. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
তুমি কি তোমার আনসার পেয়েছো?
জি স্যার পেয়েছি।
তুমি কোন ইয়ারে তারিকুজ্জামান?
স্যার 49তম আবর্তন।
কোন কোন ফার্স্ট ইয়ার না সেকেন্ড ইয়ার?
ফার্স্ট ইয়ার।
First year, okay. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your interest, really. Yeah. You're in good start. I see a hand from Anika.
Hello, Bhaiya.
Hello.
Hi. I was actually wondering, you were talking about like embassies not paying much hit to the listening part that you were discussing. So I was wondering that how much effect listening can actually play on image building of a nation. And my second question is, you were talking about Israeli passport, like our passport change, like actually rejecting or eliminating the part clause that Bangladeshis can't travel to Israel. So in particular, that case, what perspective helped? Like what diplomacy actually worked in particular this case? So these are the two questions.
Okay. Remind me the first one again. The first question. Listening.
Oh, yeah, the first one was listening. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. Can you ask me the questions again? I know it's about listening, and I know that.
I was wondering that how much listening actually can impact, like if a country.
So yes, I fully get it now. Thank you. So here's the thing, that according to Nicholas Carr, listening is the most important, as I was saying earlier, mainly because if you don't understand like what is your position, where do you stand, then you cannot take proper step to where you want to go, right? So for that, you need feedback, and that's the element that you need to use, listening. And listening can come in many forms, right? So for example, for my study, I described listening as, let me look at something quickly so that I can give you a proper answer to this. Um, this is going to be hard to find. If I shared my screen, you will be yeah, with confidence that it is a result of active advocacy campaigns, right? So now, where did this advocacy happen? Definitely, to an extent, some government level. However, to other, like many interest group and like people too, like civil society and other stuffs. One sector that particularly helped with like or pushed for this decision would be the business sector, because this is like when you do not have a diplomatic relationship with a country, you cannot conduct business with them. And Bangladesh, as you all know, I mean, the business sectors is growing. Like our businesses are doing really well in almost all sectors. Like we recently turned into a middle income country just because of how like oil are different, the growth that we are seeing in different industries. So there's, I think, a growing pressure from all this, I'd say the business community, and also to some extent, the pressure from like the other advocacy from other different countries to the government directly helped make this decision. I do not think that Israel had a chance to do a lot of public diplomacy directly in Bangladesh just because there was no direct relationship to begin with. But I am sure they were contacting, listening at least. They knew that this is something where we need to work. And one of the first steps is to establish an official relation, and so that we can work from there. So I think that's how it works.
Yeah, thank you, bro.
Thank you.
শরীফুল ইসলাম ইমনের একটা প্রশ্ন, তুমি তোমার প্রশ্নটা করতে পারো। ইমন, তুমি তোমার প্রশ্নটা করতে পারো।
আমার যে কোশ্চেনটা আসলে ছিল সেটা হচ্ছে ডিজিটাল ইনফরমেটিক্স এর ক্ষেত্রে ফার্স্ট ওয়ার্ল্ড এবং থার্ড ওয়ার্ল্ডের মধ্যে একটা গ্যাপ রয়েছে। তো এই যে সেটা কি ফার্স্ট ওয়ার্ল্ড এবং থার্ড ওয়ার্ল্ডের মধ্যে কি একইভাবে কার্যকর হবে কিনা, এবং থার্ড ওয়ার্ল্ডের জন্য আলাদা কোনো সলিউশন আছে কিনা?
It's definitely, you are definitely right that there is a disparity, like what I call it, like the kind of not, I don't want to say it like that. It's more like a digital divide, like if that makes sense, that just because the first world has the most advanced technology and like higher capacity in terms of internet and other stuffs, they can do a lot more with this than the third world countries or the developing countries can. However, I think it is a challenge to overcome, but I don't see it as a major obstacle now, that in terms of when it comes to digital diplomacy or communication, we have the basic technology that we need. Yes, it would be better to have those advanced autonomous stuff that we can do using AI and other stuff. We do not have that yet, but we have enough, I think, technological capacity that we can not, if not compete, at least can keep up with them. And one reason, one very clear reason for that is that if you look at again, like the, again, I'm going to just use the example of social media, right? If we take that, I mean, most of the people, like with definitely needs to be educated to some extent, have some technical knowledge and internet connection and the device. So there are some preconditions to this. But once they have that, they can definitely reach this, like communicate with these people. And the government definitely have those. So I think this, when it comes to digital diplomacy or using digital platform for public diplomacy or any sort of diplomacy, it is actually an advantage in a position that we can actually, like, by that I mean all of you, that in a position that you know that this is not right because you have looked into it and other stuffs and people are saying this is true, they do need to speak up and say that no, this is not correct. And don't just say this is not correct, provide sources that look at this, here's my proof, and it's not just, you cannot just make up stuff, right? So when you bring in those elements, and it's a, we need to like really be careful about like how we consume media these days because of like this misinformation and disinformation. One of the reason I am not on many social media, because I don't want to get news from social media. That's like one of the, that has been one of my thing. Especially when I started studying like how social media works, when I started understanding how their algorithm works, I stopped using social media, particularly almost all Facebook product. But I don't want to just say that Facebook is bad. It's all the like social media has that, and it's not necessarily the companies. It's us. It's like us who are actually doing that, and I think we are the one who can also kind of like fight this. But to answer your question, this is a huge thing, and this is currently like one of the things that I'm studying, like propaganda via like social media. And I'm looking at, I am still working on the study, so I don't have any results or answers for you yet, but I'm looking at, I'm sure if you followed the news, you'll know this, that there was this allegations of Russia and China government interfering with the US election in last couple of years. And they did that mainly via like different social media, spreading misinformation and disinformation. So what is misinformation and disinformation? If you basically break it down in ayat term, that's propaganda, right? So I'm looking into that, like how different countries do that to kind of destabilize the government system of a country. So that's a work in progress now. Maybe in a couple of months or in maybe a little longer, I'll be done with that, and then I can give you a better answer of how we can combat this better. That to some extent answer your questions. I know that it's not an answer, but I just told you kind of.
এই প্রশ্নটার সাথে আমার একটু যুক্ত করার কথা ছিল যে আমরা দেখি যে ফরেন পলিসি এস্টাবলিশমেন্টের ক্ষেত্রে মিডিয়া একটা বড় রোল প্লে করে, সেটা আমরা 9/11 থেকে দেখছি বা বিভিন্ন ইন্টারভেনশনের কথা কেউ দেখি। তো আমার কথা, আপনি যে বললেন যে আমাদের অবশ্যই অ্যাওয়ার্ড থাকতে হবে সোর্সের ক্ষেত্রে এবং সেটাকে জাস্টিফাই করতে হবে, তো সেক্ষেত্রে দেখা যায় যে মিডিয়ার যে বিভিন্ন সোর্স গুলো আছে সেক্ষেত্রেও কিন্তু একটা সেখানে জনগণ হয়তো কোনো একটা সোর্সকে বেশি প্রাধান্য দিচ্ছে, অথবা সেটা আবার গভর্নমেন্ট থেকে প্রাধান্য দিতে দেওয়া হচ্ছে না, বা ওইটাকে আবার লিগালাইজ করা হচ্ছে না। তো এরকম একটা সিচুয়েশন তৈরি হচ্ছে যেখানে আমি মনে করছি এই বিষয় এইখান থেকে সোর্সটা কারেক্ট হইতে পারে, আবার দেখতেছি ওইটা অন্য জায়গায় ওইটাকে ভুল বলা হয়েছে। সেই ক্ষেত্রে যে ডিফিকাল্টি তৈরি হয় এবং সরকারের যে একটা ইনভলভমেন্ট সেখানে তৈরি আছে কোন একটা নির্দিষ্ট পার্টের ক্ষেত্রে, তো সেই ক্ষেত্রে পাবলিক টু গভর্নমেন্টের যে রিলেশন সেইটাকে পাবলিক ডিপ্লোমেসির ক্ষেত্রে কোনো ধরনের চেঞ্জ আনে বা এফেক্ট করে।
So that kind of that is a really good question, and that's like that's where kind of like the critical thinking portion kicks in. The reason I say that is that yes, there will be discrepancies between two sources, right? একটা সোর্স বলতে পারে যে এই আসলে এটা ঘটছে, আর একটা সোর্স বলতে পারে না এইটা ঘটছে। So which one do I believe? So the answer always is find more than, like find more, try to find more. Okay. If you see two and you have this conflicting information, look at 3, 4, 5 and see what one like is the more like often, which one is giving you the most idea. And the other thing is that the